But there is no peace in Islam. Islam has a political agenda, and that political agenda is to conquer the world for Islam. Muslim Brotherhood today is banned in most Muslim countries, and it has found refuge in England, America, Australia. So the offshoots are ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, all Boko Haram. All of these terrorist organizations are the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is why wherever they are, if they're in India or Australia or America or England or Twin Towers or train bombings and stadium bombings in England, this will carry on. This is going to get worse. But you see, the problem is that the Westerners are religiously uneducated, religiously illiterate. But everybody's apprehensive because we know that they'll come for the Jews, they'll come for us. The Hindu Bangladeshis do obviously discuss this issue amongst themselves, but the larger, wider Australian community completely ignores it. As far as the Hindu community, we're still talking about this. We're still discussing it. We don't know what direction we're going to take.
Namaste and welcome to Sangam Talks. On the Christmas Day, I am being joined by Pandit Rami Sivan ji from Sydney, Australia, to discuss various issues arising out of the shocking attack that took place on December 14 at Bondi Beach in Australia, where a gunman, Islamic gunman, came and attacked the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. There are various aspects to this incident. We will be discussing this incident in the light of anti-Semitism and the concept of global Muslim brotherhood and other related issues. But before we begin, let me introduce the viewers to Pandit Rami Sivan ji. Pandit Rami Sivan ji was born of a Christian mother and a Jewish father in South Africa. Having read extensively about different religions, he converted to Hinduism at a young age, and he also trained under the tutelage of his guru in India for about 3 years, and then he went to Israel where he trained as a nurse, and then he moved to Australia. In Australia, he has been an acharya and a yoga teacher for the Hindus for over 40 years now, and he is also the president of the Australian Council of Hindu Clergy. Welcome, Panditji, to this podcast, and let me start with a very basic question. A community is celebrating its festival with no covert or overt threat of any violence, and then a couple of gunmen come and start killing people indiscriminately. The basic question is, what is the problem with Islam?
So Islam has an inseparable element of violence in it against the unbelievers. Although we mockingly call it the religion of peace because they call it themselves, it is a religion of peace. But there is no peace in Islam. Islam has a political agenda, and that political agenda is to conquer the world for Islam. And what people have to understand is the background to this, Islamicism, which is political Islam, started after the First World War, when the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, was dissolved. Kemal Atatürk, who became the president, he cancelled the Khalifa, the Caliphate. In Egypt, there was a character known as Hassan al-Banna, and he created the Muslim Brotherhood. The objective of the Muslim Brotherhood is to reinstate the Khalifa. And his principal theoretician was a guy called Sayyid Qutb. And Sayyid Qutb studied political science, went to America, came back to Egypt, and he then wrote a famous book called The Milestones, which is a book about the conquest of the world and how Islam has to assert itself. So in 1954, Sayyid Qutb was executed by Nasser, and the Muslim Brotherhood was banned. Muslim Brotherhood today is banned in most Muslim countries, and it has found refuge in England, America, Australia. All the offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood are, so they call Ikhwan al-Muslimin. So the offshoots are ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, all Boko Haram. All of these terrorist organizations are the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood. And their goal is to disrupt and undermine Western civilization, basically. That is a summary of the position. So wherever the Muslim Brotherhood sets up pockets, like in Australia and elsewhere, they are undermining the status quo. That is their objective. And these people, the father was actually an Indian national, but he and the son were inspired by ISIS, Islamic State. So they went to the Philippines, they did weapons training, and they came back and they planned this massacre. And 15 people only died, but they threw bombs into the crowd, which didn't go off, luckily, because there's more than 1,000 people gathered for the festival, and they were closely, seated together. So if the bombs had gone off, there would be untold numbers of deaths.
I come from a journalistic background, and one of the things we are told is that proximity is one of the more important ingredients of news. As in, if something is happening within, say, 5 or 10 kilometers, I would be more interested rather than in knowing what is happening maybe thousands of kilometers away. I agree that today we are a connected world, and various things happening in different theaters of the world impact us. That is one part. But when we look at the Muslims, whether in India or even in Australia and other places, they always seem to be caring only about one particular thing. Let's say the issue of Palestine. They always seem to be, the Muslims all around the world seem to be talking only about one thing, or they seem to be concerned only about one issue. So what is it part of that global Muslim Brotherhood, and how do you see this, in terms of anti-Semitism and other related issues?
Okay, so there's two things to consider here. First of all, the inherent anti-Semitism in Islam. So when you go back in the history, Muhammad presented himself to the Jews as a prophet, and he expected them to accept him and endorse him. But they, in actual fact, mocked him, and they refuted, and they showed that he was a fake prophet. Over and over again, they refuted him. They exposed him as a fake prophet. So he developed a hatred for the Jews. Now, there were a large number of Jewish tribes, more than 12 Jewish tribes living in Saudi Arabia. And they were living quite happily with the pagans, with the polytheists. They were living very happily together. In actual fact, Yemen at one stage was a Jewish state. The Himyar kingdom, it was a Jewish, the whole of Yemen was a Jewish kingdom. And so Muhammad developed a hatred for them. So obviously he was channeling memos from Allah that was saying that the Jews are corrupt, the Jews are evil, the Jews are wicked, etc., etc. And so this anti-Semitism is in the Quran. Although, to be honest, over the centuries, it hasn't been consistently applied. And sometimes under certain sultans, the Jews were more free. They were accepted as Ahl al-Dhimma, which means, they're dhimmis. They can just pay the jizya and live happily. So, but there are also periods of pogroms, violence, burning synagogues, all this this went on periodically over the century, over the past 14 centuries. Now, with the establishment of the State of Israel, now what you have to understand is that in Islam, there's a concept of the waqf. You have a problem with the waqf in India.
Yes.
So the principle is that if a land was once conquered by Islam, it remains Muslim land in perpetuity. So this includes India. India is part of the waqf. The whole of India, not
Okay.
Israel is obviously part of the Waqf, as is Spain. So it is the duty of the Muslims to regain that land for Islam. So it is intolerable for the Muslims that a Jewish state should be set up on land that was once controlled by them. So they cannot abide it under any circumstance. That is the one point. Now, the anti-Semitism is also part of that issue as well. It's not just about a land. This whole issue of Palestine is not about land. It's not a real estate issue. It's about religion. And so the Muslims also have garnered support around Palestine because that is the rallying point for them. They can all come together on that issue. But nowadays, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all that, they're breaking ranks with that. And they have made peace deals with Israel. And so that is happening. But in general, all the Pew polls that are taken showed that Muslims are 90% anti-Semitic in whatever country they live in.
Okay.
About 90% of them.
Okay, now my one question that again springs out of what you explained is that if I'm not wrong, even the Jewish and the Christian belief is that there was a promised land, or God gave them the land as and said that you now enjoy the earth. I have created the earth and you enjoy the earth. Where do you see Islam also has several similarities with Christianity and Judaism in some of its aspects, but what sets it apart is this whole propensity or the penchant for violence, and rather unprovoked violence, which has all baffled many of the communities and the security apparatus of various countries, of course, but many of the communities also, that we are not disturbing them, we are not saying anything to them, but why should they be constantly looking to terrorize a particular community or a minority? It is something that is happening across the world. In Australia, probably it was one of the biggest incidents so far, if I'm correct on that. So just wanted to get an idea as to why violence is so important for Islam, especially of the unprovoked type.
Well, as I said, the injunction is given to them. I mean, I can get the quote quite easily. It said, fight those that do not believe in Allah and the Prophet, and declare what is haram and halal according to the Prophet and Allah. Fight them until the religion, all of it, is for Allah. That's in Surah Baqarah. I can't remember the exact ayah. So it's stated there quite clearly. Now, the vast majority of Muslims will not act on this. And the Quran actually says that the Holy Land, was given to the Jews. It states that quite clearly, that the land was given by Allah to the Jews. Again, this is not something that the pro-Palestinians will quote or even reference. So it clearly states that the kuffar have to be conquered. And that is why within a few centuries after the start of Islam, they conquered the Christian world from Spain to India. Within 2 centuries, I think, they conquered it. And wherever they went, they colonized and imposed their religion on it was mainly Jews and Christians in those lands. They all converted. So Palestinians and Iraqis and Syrians and Egyptians were all originally Christians who were forcibly converted to Islam, or converted under duress and strain, not because of the truth of the doctrines of Islam. And so they have that mandate. Now, as I said, the majority of Muslims are peaceful, loving. They only care about their families. They want to educate their children. They're good citizens, the majority. We can say 90%. But 10% are those that are jihadis, that are really intent on following through on these jihadi commands. But 10% of how many billion people is a lot. And this is why wherever they are, if they're in India or Australia or America or England or Twin Towers or train bombings and stadium bombings in England, this will carry on. This is going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. But you see, the problem is that the Westerners are religiously uneducated, religiously illiterate. And I think this also, you can say it is somewhat racist, because they think that Western culture is so superior, that this has been the attitude in Australia, that we don't need to worry about these people, because once they come here and they see how beautiful this country is, how peaceful it is, how wealthy it is, they will naturally adapt and adopt our way of living. So there's no need to worry about it. And they didn't take into account, they don't study history, they don't see what's happening in other countries. And so they think, oh, these are all good migrants. And so they brought them in. And then we've got hate preachers. Even last year, when the war in Gaza started, we had hate preachers that were on record saying that they're quoting a hadith that says that the final days will not come until the Muslims kill the Jews, and the Jews will hide behind trees and rocks, and the tree and the rock will call out, "Oh Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." They were preaching this in their mosques. Now,
Okay.
We have hate speech laws, right? So they tried to prosecute them. Some people brought, because it's all on record, and that case failed. Why? Because they said, oh, we don't believe this. We were just reading from our scriptures. And because of freedom of religion, you're allowed to read whatever you want. You can't be prosecuted. And they said, no, we are not saying it. We don't believe in this, but the scripture says it. So we are just reading it to our people. And so the freedoms of the West have entrapped them and become the means of destroying the Western civilization.
Will it be a case where the West seems to have believed its own propaganda of free speech? Because West at one point, with all the colonial powers, I mean the powers going out colonizing Asia and Africa, do you think that West created this freedom of speech principle or a high value, and they have sort of believed in it a bit too much to care for the dangers that Islamic terrorism, puts to them?
Well, it's a very good question. I think that, again, it comes down to the naivety and the religious illiteracy of the West, so that they just refuse to educate themselves. Now, in Australia in particular, we have the left and the right. All right. So the left, and all over the world, the left, which is i.e. the socialist communists, have aligned with the Muslims.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And all the protest marches that every weekend, we had protest marches for 2 years in Sydney, and it was led by the Socialist Alliance.
So these protest marches were for what? What was the cause?
Free Palestine.
Okay.
And they were calling, globalize the Intifada, and from the river to the sea, Palestine free, which is a genocidal chant. Because from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, Israel is there.
Israel.
So if they say that area must be liberated, what is going to happen to the non-Muslims that are living there, the Christians and the Jews? So, and this was going on, led by the Socialist Alliance. And they are Trotskyites. So Trotsky, his thesis was that there should be perpetual disruption and revolution. So the Trotsky people, they will protest everything. If it's gay rights or same-sex marriage or women's liberation or Muslim issues, whatever it is, they'll take it up as a protest. Climate change, oil, whatever. Everything is a cause for disrupting society. So the left was supporting them. And now we have a leftist government. And the government that we have at the moment is the most pro-Palestinian government we've ever had. And they will refuse, up until now, even after this massacre, they refuse to use the word Islamism. They said, oh, and every time because we had a synagogue was burnt down, another synagogue was damaged, a child care center, Jewish child, was attacked. This has been going on for 2 years now. Jewish shops have been firebombed. Jewish suburbs have been disturbed, graffiti, cars burnt. This has been going on for 2 years, and this is the culmination of that. Now, an interesting fact is that Anthony Albanese and the government, they cannot bring themselves to mention the word Islamism. But on the other hand, the right, all the right-leaning media like Sky News, for example, every single one of the anchors, every single one of the people on it are now mentioning it. Said we have to call the problem what it is. The problem is not guns. It is Islamic radicalism. So now the cat is out of the bag, and people now are talking about Islamicism is the problem. Then the Imams Council, that all the Hindu clergy, we went down to Bondi and we did a Shanti part. We asked the Rabbi, we asked the Rabbi's permission. They said, yeah, please carry on. So all of us, we sat and we did a Shanti part, and we offered flowers and candles and whatever to show our solidarity. Also, some of the Christian clergy came, but not one single Muslim imam has gone to that place and shown any solidarity. When the first press release came out, they never mentioned the word Jew. They said, we condemn the shooting incident at Bondi. The shooting incident. It was a massacre of Jews. They didn't mention it. Then their PR people must have got on to them. They put out a second release and they said, we condemn the massacre of the Jews. They actually mentioned the word Jew. But up until then, they didn't mention it. And every time they mention, the leftists mention anti-Semitism, immediately they'll put in Islamophobia. They say, oh, we condemn anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia.
Yeah.
So they try to link the two together. Now that link is broken. And politicians are now standing up. The opposition in parliament is standing up and calling it for what it is, Islamism, Islamic radicalism. Now, the Imams Council has got a lawyer who speaks on their behalf, a guy called Bilal Rauf, I think, something like that. And he is on TV saying, oh, ISIS has got nothing to do with Islam. Even though the name says Islamic State, nothing to do with Islam. But the journalists are so, because most of our left journalists are left-wing, right? So they're all lefties, they're all... again, they're also illiterate in these matters. And they're just sitting wide-eyed, listening, oh, okay, fine, okay. But they don't ask him why. How can you, can you...
No follow-up questions.
Yeah, no follow-up questions. How is it different? They are following the Quran, they're saying the Shahada, they're doing namaz. How are they not Muslims? Exactly. But they don't use those questions.
I have a feeling that when you mentioned that 90% of Muslims do not subscribe to this, this whole violence thing, and there are about 10% who do this, but they have somehow managed to create a very efficient machinery, like you mentioned about the PR and everything, where they are able to hide it in plain sight, hide their intentions, hide their violent intentions in plain sight, and yet somehow seem to win that argument. How do you see this?
Again, it comes back to the Muslim Brotherhood, because it also like sort of starts in America, where they hone their skills and they develop they've actually followed the communist, regime handbook of how to create disruption. And so they have infiltrated all the major institutes. They've infiltrated government. In America already, they're taking over states. You've got Muslim mayors, and they're already changing the towns that they live in to become more Islamic. So far, we don't have any Muslim mayors we've got a lot of Muslims in politics, even in the current current cabinet, there are 2 Muslims and 1 Hindu. In our local government, we got 1 Hindu. The treasurer is a Hindu. Actually, it's very interesting because our local state government has been very strong on this, even though they are left-wing. But Chris Minns is our state premier. And I've met him many times because I deal with the government all the time in interfaith matters. And the treasurer is a guy called Daniel Muki, whose wedding I performed. And I've known him since he was a boy. And every time in all public meetings that we go to, he will always come in front of all the politicians. He'll touch my feet and he'll say, Pranam Guruji. And so he's a wonderful guy. And he shows the pride of his religion. And he is the first politician that swore an oath of allegiance on the Bhagavad Gita. So, and also, you got to understand that in Australia, Hinduism is the 3rd largest religion. So the first is Christians, obviously. Muslims are close to 800,000, and Hindus are catching up. So we're very close to now almost 1 million. So,
in fact, I was coming to that question. We have discussed the Islamic the global Muslim Brotherhood and anti-Semitism. How have the Hindus responded in Australia, and should they be cautious for the future? Because, as you said, the Hindus are the 3rd largest. So, do you see the Islamists seeking to attack Hindus also, Hindu localities, suburbs, etc.?
We've actually had an incident. A couple of years ago, there was a shooting in past one of the drive-by shooting past a Hindu temple. Because that Hindu temple is located in a Muslim majority neighborhood. And so a car drove by, they sprayed the temple with bullets. So now the temple has got a shield in front of the door to prevent such incidents. But also that was very quickly swept under the carpet. Then after that, we had some graffiti written on a Hindu temple by some Khalistanis. But so far, the Muslims have left the Hindus alone. But the Hindu Council and our organization, the Australian Council of Hindu Clergy, have always stood with the Jews. And we have made that declaration openly that the Hindus stand with the Jews. And so, and we have always been in contact with all the Jewish organizations, and we have expressed our support for them. And actually, I was just telling one of the politicians the other day that after the 70 Common Era, when the Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans, and Jews migrated to Kerala. And we had in India one of the oldest settled Jewish population. And in actual fact, the first free Jewish state was in Kerala. It was given by the Malabari kings. But the Portuguese attacked them, and then they fled to Cochin, and the Raja of Cochin gave them land next to the palace to build the Jewish quarter. So the Maharajas have always protected the Jews in India, and India is the only country in the world that has never experienced anti-Semitism. And the Jews have thrived in India like in no other country. And then we had the wave of the Iraqi Jews after the Iraq began killing their Jews. Prior to that, we had the Portuguese Jews that came to Goa, and they were persecuted by the Portuguese. There was a Goa Inquisition. But in the rest of India, in Calcutta and in Cochin, where the big Jewish communities are, there's never, ever been one day of anti-Semitism.
So in Australia, is the Hindu community doing something special or to ward off against these threats?
Well, the only thing that we can do is, boost our security around our temples, which we have done, and we are keeping an eye on the problem. But currently, the problem is between the Jewish community and the Muslim community. So, apart from giving them moral support, where we can. There's at the moment but everybody's apprehensive because we know that they'll come for the Jews, they'll come for us. We are also in their sights.
Sir, from your personal experience, like I was going through the internet and look at some of your work, I came across an incident where it seemed that Islamists somehow they have a way of winning the argument, or using some spinning strategies and all that. So my question to you is that when we talk about some sort of peace between communities, or some sort of friendship between the communities, it always seems that if you give them a platform, the Islamists, they will use it, and then they will use it to turn the argument against us, and then ultimately unleash the violence also. So how does these communities engage? Do we give them some platform, or do we say, okay, let's maintain distance?
That's an interesting question. Now, in Australia, I've been involved in interfaith dialogue for the past 20 years. But up until now, it's always been a case of the religious leaders getting together and having photo shoot. So you'll hug koalas, you'll have tea, and you'll have the photo shoot, and then the government can publicize this as, oh, see how we all get on together. And this all started after there was a terrorist attack known as the Lint Cafe, where one jihadi held a number of hostages in a cafe in downtown Sydney, and he got killed and a couple of people got killed, but they managed to suppress that. And that was the first jihadi attack that we had. And after that, the government was very particular to try and show social cohesion, multicultural cohesion, all this kind of thing. But I've always been skeptical about it because all interfaith dialogue will happen between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and Hindus and Buddhists are never invited. Now, together, Hindus and Buddhists constitute the biggest religious bloc, apart from the Christians. If you combine
in Australia,
yes,
okay.
So we are the biggest bloc if you combine us, but we are never invited to the interfaith dialogue between them. And in reference to what you said earlier, I was invited onto a program, Dawa Guys program. And I was very naively, they approached me and they said they'd like to me to just discuss Hinduism. They called it demystifying Hinduism. So they said, if you can come on and we'll just ask you some questions. I said, okay, but can you give me the questions beforehand? So I was invited on this Dawa program, and they said to me, look, we just want to ask you some questions about Hinduism, and nothing too, intense, and you just explain to us demystifying Hinduism. I said, okay, can you give me the questions beforehand so that I know what you're going to ask? They said, yes, we'll give you the questions, but they never did. So I went on there, and then they started with all these questions that, I wasn't prepared for. And I went there with a very positive mind. So I know enough about Islam to be able to refute Islam. I'm, very good at that. But I wasn't prepared for that because I was just, in the soft stage of just explaining to them. I wasn't there to be aggressive or to, fight with them. And then they brought out some guy that they hadn't told me they're going to have a, what do they call him? A guest speaker.
A guest, yeah.
So this was some kind of like a attack dog that then, attacked me. And that was one incident. Then I told them, look, this is not right. You didn't tell me about this attack dog you're going to bring on, and you didn't give me the questions beforehand. They said, oh, sorry, next time we'll. So the same thing happened the next time. And then I said, look, I'm not doing this anymore. And then they went and cut my, answers, and they created this propaganda stuff. So they misrepresented me in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do, it's part of their technique.
One thing, which a subject which is of quite a bit of concern for us these days, especially in India, is what is happening in Bangladesh. I know Australia has its own geopolitics, and whatever India has its own geopolitics and other issues. But the fact remains that the Hindus who are in the minority in Bangladesh, and they have already been reduced to very low percentages of the population. They are being targeted in the name of Islam, or in the name of who will control the political regime there. Uh, are these things also being discussed? These things being discussed or taken up in Australia also? The Hindus or the Hindu bodies, do they take this up in Bangladesh? I mean, on the Bangladesh issue.
Not, we do have a very big Bangladesh community here, a lot of refugees from Bangladesh that I've spoken to.
Hindus.
Yes, and we have got
Okay.
Muslims as well.
Okay.
The two communities don't mix, but the Bangladeshis, the Hindu Bangladeshis, do obviously discuss this issue amongst themselves. But the larger, wider Australian community completely ignores it. It may be on
Okay.
like sort of the right-wing news, you might get some report, but the left is completely avoid it.
Yeah, they simply ignore. I mean, that's about not giving the platform, as I was saying. Panditji, one last question. I think we can then wrap it up. Uh, I was just doing some basic research, and I came across a view that the religions that developed in the desert, they were the monotheistic religions.
Yes.
Or to put it the other way, monotheistic religions got developed in the deserts because survival was the only thing there, and the regions which had rainforests and other things, they developed polytheistic religions. Uh, in that light, I mean, I'm not getting into the veracity of that theory. That can be discussed. You can tell me more about it, but would you say that Islam also is a religion? Sorry, it's a political thought process cloaked in the religion, cloaked as a religion. So, what are your comments on that?
Well, all the three monotheistic religions, I mean that I put in the inverted commas as well, because there's a lot of dispute amongst them. Even that they call themselves monotheists, but they cannot get on together. They all hate each other. And this is another point. I say that we have a Kumbh Mela, millions of people come there, different Hindus, different sects, and there's never any violence. Everybody gets on together. And we all worship different gods, have different practices, different caste creeds, but we can live together. But these three monotheistic religions have been at war with each other for 1400 years and still going on. Islam, and all of them have a political component to them. And the political component is because if you have a supreme God who delivers laws, he is a legislator. So the laws are from God, and it is imperative for human beings to follow the laws of God. So it becomes a theocracy. So Judaism started off as a theocracy. Christianity followed, and then Islam is the major theocracy today. So the other two religions, Christianity and Judaism, they, after the Reformation, the separation of church and state. And so they
Yes.
dropped, there's no more Jewish theocracy or Christian theocracy. But in Islam, they continued to hold with theocracy. And so this is the big problem. They are basically a political movement clothed in a religious garb. So Sharia is inseparable from Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And wherever the Muslims go, they want to institute Sharia, wherever it is. And so,
Yes.
first of all, when they arrive and they're small in number, then they are very, peaceable, no problem. And as their numbers increase, they start making demands. So they want halal food. They want prayer rooms. They want
Yes.
days off for there was even a movement last exams that Muslim students should be exempt from the exams during Ramadan.
Should be exempt from the exams. Which
They should, and they should have exams at some other time because they are hungry and they can't.
Okay.
So they wanted some concessions.
So this is that we are a special community and we need special concessions.
And so actually the big problem is that Hindus try to jump on this bandwagon as well. So there have been some voices within the Hindu community to start banning beef, for example. And the Hindu Council, the Australian Council of Hindu Clergy, we have resisted that. We said, look, our community doesn't eat beef, but a lot of the young people do, to tell you the truth. They go to McDonald's and you cannot control what people eat. But we should not at any stage try and impose our values on the larger community. And if they're eating beef, that's up to them to do whatever they want. I mean, also in reference to this, I might bring in another little thing that happened. A couple of years ago, the government asked for submissions to the change of law to allow same-sex marriage. So the thing is that the government already decides this before they go for consultation.
Okay.
And so then they asked the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, the Hindus, everybody, what is your position on it? So we had a meeting of all the Hindu clergy, and they were confused. They didn't know what to do. So I said to them, look, the law is about the larger community. It's got nothing to do with us. I mean, you guys are still going to perform the Vivaha Samskara. You're going to do your stuff. But it's not about you. It's about them. And if they want equality, gender equality in same-sex marriages, we should not object. And then we gave a no objection submission. And we were the only community to give no objection. Even the Buddhists objected. Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, Christians, everybody objected. They said no ways. And our community, to our pride, and we were complimented by a lot of organizations, said we are the only religious community that said no objection. And the whole basis for that I argued was that we should not impose our values onto the wider community.
Sir, just as a follow-up question, from what you said, some would say that will this type of approach not undo or damage or dampen the interests of the Hindu community per se, because the Hindu community is trying to merge into the larger existence there in terms of law, society, polity, everything. But these communities, let's say the other communities, the Islam, the Buddhists, even the Jews, etc., they want to assert their identity. So then will it not be detrimental to the Hindu identity, or do you think its assertion in Australia is not required per se?
There is a difference. To integrate into the society means to be able to work and live in harmony with all other communities. Assimilation is to become exactly like everybody else. So unfortunately, Indians really have a propensity for assimilation. So for example, even within 2 generations, they've lost their languages. I mean, the young people today that I am dealing with, that I'm performing marriages, they don't even know how to speak their language. And because the parents come here and they only speak English to them at home. Some people do still speak Hindi or Tamil at home, and those children learn. So there is a propensity to assimilate very easily. But another thing is that we have so many Hindus in Australia right now that there are schools that are entirely Indian. There may be 1 or 2 white kids. The whites are the minority in many of the schools, especially in the western suburbs where I'm living. The majority of people here are Indians. It's like being, if you take the train in the morning to Sydney, it is like being on the Mumbai Express.
Okay.
Only Indians from, and the conductors are Indian, the drivers are Indian. So we have a lot of, Indian movies are playing. We've got Sanskrit schools. So there's a lot of activity happening because the Indians are such a large community. So I think that we will resist complete assimilation, but we do encourage integration, which is happening. So, for example, Indians, especially Hindus, are very largely represented in the medical field, in
Okay.
the professions, in the legal profession, in IT, a lot of representation. And interestingly enough, we are the least represented in the court system, except as lawyers.
Mhm.
But the other community that they are majority represented in the prison system, and
Okay.
they refuse to integrate or assimilate. So they maintain their own pockets, and that's one of the big problems with Islamic radicalism, is this refusal to become part of the Australian society.
Yeah. So, sir, as as a concluding statement, I would like to know or to get your view on how is it going to be what is the way forward for Australia as a whole in dealing with Islamism, number one. And of course, specifically, the number two is specifically how is the Hindu community or how should the Hindu community go forward into this, it's a chessboard of community and religious identity assertion. So, how do you see this?
That's a very big question. I don't think that we've really, after this massacre, we're all confused. And Pahalgam in India, Bondi, it's the same pattern that's happening all over the world.
Yes.
And the government, as I say, up until now, they've refused to acknowledge it. But now people are starting to talk about it, and there's the impetus is growing to actually clamp down on Islamism and rein in the Muslims. And so that's already going to be happening. And in actual fact, the next elections, I hope we're going to lose this government, and a more sensible government will come, will rise up. As far as the Hindu community, we're still talking about this. We're still discussing it. We don't know what direction we're going to take. So you'll have to watch the space.
Right.
Have to keep you updated.
Yes. Thank you so much, Panditji, for your insights on the situation in Australia. And I urge the viewers to take note of these things, take note of the developments. If you are in Australia, do take an interest into what is happening with your community and how is your community interacting with the other community. And wishing you all well. Thank you so much, Panditji, once again.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.